Welcome, everyone. I am Trina Wyatt. I'm founder and CEO of Conscious Good, and I am thrilled to be co-hosting our movie of the month today with Allan Kaplan of the Integral Cinema Project. Mark, great to have you with me.
Hello. It's great to be here, as always.
Good. And today we are going to be discussing the film Goodbye, Christopher Robin. So I hope all of you have seen it. If you haven't, still stay with us, participate, you're in for a treat. So we begin each of these monthly sessions with a meditation or perception practice. The idea is that before we are viewing these conscious films, the conscious media, that we get into the right frame of mind, body, and spirit to receive the messages and to have the most transformative experience. So today, as I said, Mark has written a beautiful practice that I am honored to share with all of you. And for this, it'll just take about 10 minutes. If we can all get into a comfortable position, you can sit with your eyes open or closed, whatever feels most comfortable for you. And bring your awareness first to your breath. Let that ground you in this present moment. And now bring your awareness to your head brain, to your thoughts. And expand your awareness to your heart brain, to your emotions. And now expand your awareness to your gut brain, to your physical, visceral, and sensory awareness. Now, as you breathe out and in, expand your awareness to the space around you, to the physical space between you and the physical objects and systems around you. Expand your awareness to the relational spaces around you, between yourself and others, happening right now and in your field of memory. Expand into the cultural systems and fields around you, to the great individual and collective challenges facing you, your loved ones, your communities, your country, and all of humanity. Now attempt to hold these challenges in the context of the evolutionary stream of your own life, the lives of those around you, the life of your community, culture, and society, and the life of all humanity. Imagine you and all beings are part of a collective self. Breathe in to this collective self. Now imagine that all of the challenges we are facing as potential individual and collective evolutionary lessons and a form of exposure therapy for this collective self. Now imagine that you, your loved ones, and all beings in this collective self are facing our greatest challenges, and that we have only a limited amount of time left before facing more and greater hardships and destruction and possible extinction. Now, as you hold this perceptual field, ask yourself, what would I do? What message would I give? What lesson would I try to learn and would I try to teach to help save ourselves, each other, and our world? Take a moment to sit with this and feel what it feels like in all dimensions of your being. Okay, thank you all. I hope you had some beautiful insights. What would you do and what message would you give? Fantastic. Mark, will you take us into the background of Goodbye, Christopher Robin? Give us some context for this film and why it's important.
Sure. Yes, thank you. Okay, well, this moment, as probably all of us realize, is a very challenging moment for all of us, for most of us, I think. And we're trying to do films during this time that have resonance with where we are and speak to where we are. And this little film was discovered by Jonathan here as flying on a plane. Discovered this little gem. And what's really resonant and amazing for me about this is I never realized that Winnie the Pooh was actually a transformative media experience for the author and for culture and society. And this film kind of really captures that in a beautiful way, how it was transformative across all quadrants. In integral theory and integral cinema theory, we talk about, there's 4 main domains of existence, and we could look at them as the interior, what's inside of us, our thoughts, our feelings, and then there's the exterior of us, our bodies and the object space. There's the systems around us, the environment, and then there's that space between us, the relationships, the culture. And these are tetra and meshed, we call it, which is tetra means 4. And so the 4 quadrants, these 4 domains of experience co-evolve. They're enmeshed with each other. And when you're doing a transformative work, a deeply transformative work, this process of tetra enmeshment is triggered. And this film captures that process, and what's beautiful in many ways is for us, we are in a similar field right now in terms of the author of Winnie the Pooh went to war in World War I and was traumatized by it and been through this horrible experience and wanted to do something to help humanity to stop war, to not have another war. And he was looking around and people were just not realizing, wake up to the fact that they just had this horrible thing and it could happen again and we got to do something to stop it. And from there, he got this purpose and passion, even though everybody in his life was like, you're crazy, or wasn't really into it. And he went and he tried to create a direct work, a book about war. But his wound was so deep and so profound. One of the things I think is beautiful is that it teaches us that we need to have this goal and this passion, this intention. So we are in the middle of, we've just experienced a major crisis. We're still in the middle of it in a way, but there's like a moment for many of us of breathing room. I mean, the pandemic has hit most places, and the curve is, I mean, in some it's still up, and some it's down, but there's a, and so we've just been through a battle, and there's more to come. It feels like there's more to come, and a lot of things brought us here, and the artist is, and any media creator in this moment, I think it's important for us to recognize the dynamics of how we can help right now as artists and media makers. This moment is a calling for us to do something, to speak. If we're an artist, we have to speak, and that's what this, and that we have to connect with that drive and that passion, that our voice, but also be open to how we imagine we're going to transform the world or help the world. We don't want to get too attached to the precise effect. So here's this person who, and so this film beautifully kind of captures how this process unfolded, ping-ponging between the post-war effect on his consciousness, his whole thing, and those around him, his relationships, the society, that the culture that contributed to brought it here, that is still happening, but still shaping our future the same way. And so he could feel and so how do we as an artist speak? But also it's like, so his thing was, I want to write a book to stop war. But what ended up happening is that he needed to address his own wound first, and his relationship with his child and all that. There was a healing of the wound through these stories. And so Winnie the Pooh wasn't his book he was writing against war. He was doing that too. But the flow happened, and he was doing this work, and this actually ended up having a great impact on war and people's experience of war. It helped a lot of soldiers and also society, a lot of people heal from the trauma of the First War, their wounds, their loss of innocence, of hope, of that joy of life. And this brought that to them. And then at the end of the film, the son character even, realizes that the creative process that hurt him, and this was a transformational creative process that he got swept into as part of this work of art, and how it kind of messed him up, was his first feeling. But then when he saw its impact, he recognized that the sacrifice he made was worth it. And this beautifully captures this dynamic of when we're trying to create a transformative work that speaks to a really important moment. And we get in touch with that. recognize that that process is a tetra-evolutionary process, that that our own healing is kind of could be required as our relationships, and being kind of open to taking an input from all these things and riding the waves through these dimensions. So I think that's a great example of it. It's a great example of an integral work in that it weaves these multiple dimensions and the impact on the evolution of the characters, and brings us to a beautiful moment where they both see the bigger picture, a bigger picture. They're even sitting on a cliffside looking out at they're able to see a bigger picture. So that is even symbolically telling us this is the place where we have bigger picture awarenesses. So that's one of the indications of an integral work, is that it'll weave the multiple dimensions of experience into an evolutionary kind of process that brings us to a bigger picture, the characters and us, the audience.
Mark, one of the things, if I may, that really resonated for me, and that I think for those artists and creatives who are joining us, how in the film this healing process kind of came about unexpectedly when he found himself alone with his child and without any help, and having to take care of him and entertain him, and that's how this, you know, the creative process and the healing began, right? It was you know, these unexpected circumstances that prompted it. And it reminds me of right now at this time, there's a film called The Great Realization, that short film, which was the poem by this young poet filmmaker, Tom Foolery. It's had 30 million views online. So I think it resonates with people right now. And have you seen it? It's the one where he's talking about how we're gonna use this time, we're gonna look at this time in history as the Great Realization. So, you know, this young artist is trying to find the good in the bad, you know, and anyway, so it's a phenomenon right now, right? And it came about, Betsy interviewed him for our See the Good special that's gonna air on the 1st. And he said, I found myself in quarantine with my 2 younger half siblings. They're 7 years old, and my parents are gone, and I have to take care of these kids. And so the film is him a recounting of this, looking at this time in history as the Great Realization. And the whole idea that he was saying is people around him were saying, I can't wait for life to be normal. I can't wait till we're out of this. And he said, well, why go back to the way things were? Why can't we envision how this is the start of a beautiful new beginning? And so I love that in just the parallel of what's happening with Milne in, you know, Goodbye Christopher Robin, is this, he was beside himself thinking, what am I going to do with this kid for this period of time? And that was when the genius arose, and he created something that is so magical and so beloved and changed so many people's lives. You know, if he hadn't been left alone with his child, would that have happened?
Yeah, I have seen Great Realization. I realize that's the one where he's describing it. Reminded me a little bit of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez also narrated a story about from the future, where they're telling, here's how we got here and how everything became green. And so some of that is creating those visions. With this film, what I loved about it is that every stage of the film shifts the previous stage and illuminates it more, so that you think it's one thing. So at first it's this very oppressive society he's in where he can't show love. So it's impossible for him to heal his wound, his trauma, because there's no hugs, there's no affection at all. And they're kind of setting up very subtly this nanny who kind of comes into the picture and you're slowly seeing how she's the one who's able to do this. And you say there's this wonderful brief period fairly early in the film where he starts to bond with his kid, and that starts to heal him and his kid, and they have this beautiful thing. But he's really not able to use that in that way. He converts it into this artistic and creative move, and then he essentially sells out his kid because he doesn't know any better. He just, well, we can make this, we can do both, we can have fun and make a book, and I'll use my kid. And so then he gets swept up in that whole world. So it really doesn't take it. It takes him a long time to recover. And meanwhile, all this other stuff happens. So you think it's going to be a feel-good film. Oh, it's about how he's getting together with his kid. Then suddenly it's just, oh, he's traumatizing his kid through this process of fame. And so it's continually sort of undermining the previous lesson and deepening it. Oh, what really is going on? And then the next phase, the kid is like suddenly an adult and he's being traumatized. He's like, I'm off. And you're also seeing how his wife has also trauma that she's never dealt with around not only the childbirth, but also trauma around him being off at war and then the kid going off to war. And that's this sort of silent trauma that you can't even acknowledge, let alone process. So we're seeing a lot of unprocessed trauma through the film. And as Mark said, the ending is sort of a large processing, where everything is unpacked and put into its place.
That's
Amazing.
beautiful.
And there is this, in a way, it's a very shamanic journey, in that there's this this healing process that's organic almost. It's like between the father and the son and the mother and the society. It's almost like this. It's the way they do these kind of. He goes through and awakenings, several different layers of awakening. And as Jonathan, as you were describing it, it's as you could feel, he awakens a little bit, and like he heals a little bit when he's writing with the child, but then another part of his ego and all of his stuff come in and use it. And then he's on to the other lesson, so it's like, so it's like as you go through, so they captured that kind of evolutionary process individually, and how, so it's this awakening process peeling away. And I think that's fundamental to the creative process as well. When we're trying to create, especially works at this time, and then to bring it back also to what Trina, you were saying, that's, about that experience, that short little film that I haven't seen, but where you talked about it, it's going back to our exercise and why this exercise was important, the idea of making a friend of death. And this book is this film and this experience it's telling about and that experience of a lot of people, a lot of us going through the pandemic and having families, it's like when we're facing a life and death situation and with our loved ones, and they're in this, we're all in a life and death situation. There is an opportunity for. There's this in the work of Carlos Castaneda, Teachings of Don Juan. This is the idea where this phrase comes from, for me anyways, making a friend of death. And Don Juan teaches that it's not until we make a friend of death until we can fully live. Because if each moment we recognize this could be my last moment, what would I do? There's an urgency. The house is on fire, right? The plane is crashing. There's an urgency in the situation that lights us up, that it could destroy us, but we can also rise up. And especially as an artist, I mean, here's this artist, this writer, who's gone through this intense trauma, who's seen, you know, millions die. Basically, he was in and that he's seen death. He knows the next war is got to be worse. And also when he has a child, and it's like, so each of them. So the wife was caught in the death field because she was waiting to hear. And so those moments where life and death is in the balance, they're traumatic, but they're also gateways for us to rise to new levels. They're very important evolutionary fields. And so I think for me, this film calls for me to really kind of hold this a lot of us are looking around and feeling this potential, capacity we have for more suffering down the pike here, wherever we are. We could feel that. And the last thing we want to do is get caught in not thinking about the unthinkable, denying a lot. We don't want to deny or shut ourselves off, especially as an artist or as a creator. We want to be able to feel what's going on and to see it and share it and help us through it. That's the shamanic force. That's like a shamanic form of art. It's like and I think that's what this work is kind of capturing in a way, is this kind of healing field, this content of, he wanted to heal humanity of the stuff that led to war. And unconsciously, he also, and subconsciously, he knew he needed to heal his trauma of war. So he was in this really powerful field that if he was in denial of it, he could have gone on as everybody else. But he couldn't deny it. It had reached a point in him where he couldn't deny it. But that became his healing journey. And it was synthesized. Anyway, so for us now to ask that question, I think is important, and for us to take on that and not get caught in making works to tell people what's going on. That's great too, informational or whatever like that. But also,
partnering.
It's like we don't want to write a book about war
in this
only. We want to help transcend. We want to make a transformative work that can maybe shift our consciousness.
Right. It's like we're presented with this unique opportunity right now in what's happening in the world and what's possible as creators if we allow ourselves to feel through it instead of denying it and blocking it off. And that's what your perception practice is about, right? That this, yes, we are interconnected, to each other, to something greater. And in feeling this and allowing ourselves to feel this and allow the creative impulse to come through that, it not only benefits us, but it'll benefit others as well. And that's what I love about this story. I'm sure there are several people on this call. I was the perfect age for when Disney released Winnie the Pooh. And I could still sing the songs and all of this. I had a Pooh Bear myself that was my beloved. And I had no idea that I didn't know anything about the story, the creation, the genesis of this. And I could just love it for what it was. And now, you know, I didn't watch the film until Mark had said, this is the film we should do this month. And in watching it, I said to my kids, I want you to watch this with me. And it was a bit hard, you know, there's those war scenes in it. But I was then able to go, we went online, we looked at the old Winnie the Pooh videos. We did the song, Kenny Loggins, right? We played the Kenny Loggins song about Back to Pooh Corner. And it was like rediscovering the magic all over again. And having a deeper appreciation in understanding the genesis, right, of how this came to be. So it was such a beautiful opportunity. So thank you, Mark, for choosing this film this month. And I would love to hear from others. I think you can unmute yourself and don't be shy. Jump on in now. And if you just want to continue to listen to Mark and Jonathan's integral wisdom, we'll let them continue as well.
I definitely had a few more things I was going to say about the film. One of the things that I admire about it, we're always looking for films that we consider integral films that aren't science fiction or fantasy, because most of the integral films tend to be ones which can play with space and time and do a lot of deep work in the context of that. But when you find something that looks on the surface like a traditional biopic, but is actually unpacking it in a much more sophisticated way, that we always love that, finding stuff like that. And with this one, the typical arc of the biopic is sort of the where are they now, which is the basic action, then rising action, then he has a major fall, you know, like a VH1, you know, and then finally everything ends up okay at the end. Or you get we consider a more pluralistic work, which is sort of taking everyone's viewpoint and saying everyone's viewpoint is valid, but not really looking for a big picture. So you could say that everyone's viewpoint is valid. He grew up in this extremely oppressive society. He was traumatized by World War I, so he wasn't capable of loving his son. He didn't even know that he could pick up the baby, you know, and comfort him when he was crying. You know, he's hopeless that way. But you're also seeing as it slowly shifts from his point of view, and the maid or the nanny, Kelly MacDonald's character, becomes more centered, and he regresses, and you start to see through her eyes. And it's very clear that she has a much healthier view. So it's not saying that all viewpoints are equal. It's saying everyone's viewpoint is equally true for them, but there is a viewpoint that's more true. And you have that beautiful moment at the end when she hugs the kid when he comes back alive. And that's the hug you've been waiting for the whole movie, in a way. It's like, thank God, finally he got a hug. And so you're realizing also that pattern is now broken. He's not going to be like that with his kids, because his nanny pattern interrupted and was his mother in a way. So it's just beautiful the way it unpacks how that love is healing. And it's making no bones about the fact that there is a truth. There is a higher truth throughout this film. So that's what separates it from a more pluralistic film.
And Jonathan, it's so true, because you're right. On the surface, it seems a little bit innocuous, an innocuous biopic.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it isn't, and it's so much more. So thank you.
Yep. Actually, the reason I watched it on the plane is because I often will look at reviews, and I can kind of sense when reviewers think there's something more to a film, but they don't really have the language to express it, because most film critics are actually very pluralistic, and they haven't studied Mark's work. So they actually don't know how to look. If they see a film like this, they can say it's uncommonly rich for a biopic. You know, you get those kinds of things, but they don't really know how to say, oh, it's doing more sophisticated things than the average biopic, because it's working on these higher levels. And that's why we're trying to illuminate this so more creators understand how to unpack these levels and how to work with them.
I would say that I was very much, I think it hinted that there was something more than a traditional biopic by the casting. I absolutely love the lead actor and think he's just an amazing talent, and I'll see anything that he's in, because everything he's been in so far has been phenomenal.
Like he's extremely wide range too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce his name? Donald? Is it
McDonough? I think it's Martin McDonough. McDonald.
Okay.
Like he's the son of the other McDonough, the famous Irish actor.
Oh,
who you know? Yeah, he's actually.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that. No wonder.
He's a scion of.
I love that. Anyone else? Rob, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this film. Or Lynn, Lisa.
Yeah, I haven't seen the film. I've wanted to see it since it came out, but I haven't had a chance to. I remember I was in Hollywood a couple of years ago. I think maybe the year it came out. I remember seeing a big poster for it, and I really want to see it. I was a big fan of the Winnie the Pooh books when I was growing up as well. And I also, I'm a retired military officer, and so I've been to war also, and I know that kind of, it wasn't like the experience the author had in World War I by any means, but so something about that experience changes you, and you come back wanting to do whatever you can to keep us from having to do that again. At least that's the experience I had. I think J.R.R. Tolkien had the same experience, and A.A. Milne had the same experience. So in the work that I'm doing, I'm working on a script right now that's kind of like an action adventure movie that will draw people's attention, but also can kind of show that there's no way to really win a war. Everybody loses. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the movie. I really appreciate the thoughts you have here. I think I'll have a richer understanding of the different layers as I watch it. So I'm looking forward to seeing it.
When you do, feel free to pop on the Creators Network and
Okay.
give some of your comments. That would be wonderful.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
And keep us posted on the work that you're doing currently, because,
Okay.
I mean, we can't have enough of that.
Right.
Actually, I want to clarify, the actor is Domhnall Gleeson. And his father is Brendan Gleeson, who's a very well-known Irish actor.
Gleeson. Oh, right.
Yes. So he got the looks, obviously, his father. But yeah, he was in The Revenant, Domhnall Gleeson. He played an American military guy. He played a fascist in the Star Wars films. He's kind of
right.
Huge range. He's all over the place. Really talented actor.
Yeah. And Ex Machina, or
Ex Machina, yep.
Machina, yeah. Perfect. Okay, anyone else in our community?
Yeah, also,
Hi.
hi. I had passed over this film when I first heard about it, thinking, who wants to see that? It sounds sweet, but maybe too sweet. And so I was really pleased to hear it being recommended. And I loved the way that the mother had her own trajectory of, kind of wanting to just enjoy life and kind of, not being the most responsible parent in a way, but also feeling pretty traumatized herself. And the way that the main character, the father, recognizes the damage he's done through seeing, he recognizes what had happened to him through seeing what happened to his family and his son especially. And I mean, there are so many layers of and also the accident of coming up with the hit when he thought his major project was something entirely other. And I've heard, is there actually a book that he did write that was not very well received about stopping war? Did he actually go on to write that book?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, in the end credits, they say he did write a book about war, but I'm sure nobody cared that much compared to Winnie the Pooh. So.
Yeah.
This is a great point, and I think Lisa brought this up in the chat as well. Is, when we're creating, if we want to create something, I mean, we have to, it's often we come from our head. It's like, oh, I have this idea, I want to stop war, I'm going to write a book against war. That's a very mind brain, that's a head brain approach. That's a very, so that's thought, and it's a great idea, but we want to, when you're trying to do a collective intervention, you're trying to reach others and not just give them a new idea. But if you want to kind of change how we do things, how we see things, you have to come, in our class we talk about this a lot, we have to come from all three brains. And what that, the idea that we actually do have three brains, that there is a major neural network and processing center in our head, in our heart, and in our stomachs. And they speak to each other, but it's not like when the brain signals the hand to move. It's a very direct, it's when the head and heart and stomach communicate, it's like three individuals going, hey, what are you up to? Oh, I'm going to, I'm doing this. All right, well, you're doing that, then I got to do this. So it's more like that. So this work of art was about healing his own emotional wound. The calling was for his own emotional wound healing, and the healing of his relationship, and for his own evolution. So the key is when we make transformative art, it's got to be organic. It's in shamanism, there's the idea of the wounded healer. And the shamanic, the healing energy transformation happens when we share an experience.
Mm.
We give people an experience that they feel in all dimensions. And to do that, we have to be coming from that. And this film is coming from that, showing us how this person was unconsciously coming from it.
That's it. So the filmmaker had to be aware of how to show what the main character was also experiencing.
Yeah, but that main character, he wasn't conscious of his process.
Right.
But this filmmaker, it was conscious enough to capture this level of the experiential reality. And so one of the ways we have to kind of hold this is when we want to create something, as Lisa was talking about, we could, we have to create this kind of work. We have to do this, we have to do that in order to do this. But we also want to be open to what our own calling is and what the calling is around us. It can't be separate from our own evolutionary journey.
Mm-hmm.
Transformative works tend to be either consciously or unconsciously connected to our own evolving
Yes.
journey. That's when they plug in. And that's showing here, he was unconsciously doing it, but that's plugging in to the Petra field. Because you're doing it, you're doing this inner and outer, you're going across domains. So that helps to trigger that kind of Petra evolutionary field.
Within the creator.
Within the creator themselves, yes.
Yeah. Well, this makes me want to go back and look at one of the other childhood loves from England, The Wind in the Willows, which I think is on a lot of lists of the most spiritual childhood, children's books. I don't know the history behind the writing of that, but it'd be interesting to look at.
I don't know. It's definitely a sort of more complex than the average childhood book, I think. I remember reading it to my son.
Oh,
And
nice.
there's that Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which Pink Floyd took their first album title from, which is one of the chapters in there, which is just this bizarre chapter in the middle of nowhere where he has this mystical encounter with Pan, in the middle of the book. It's like sort of a spooky chapter. So I was going to say in the context.
Read that.
Yeah, it's a trip. Yeah, I don't know if you read it to your kids or you had the experience of
No, I
it as
haven't
an
read it
adult.
since I was a kid. That
Yeah,
would be
yeah, it's a pretty unusual and strange book, as I recall. But with this one, there's that idea, as Mark was talking about, all the different brains, the heart brain, the head brain, and the gut brain. But each of those can become pathological, and this film does a good job of dissecting that, because you follow the heart wants what it wants, and you go into bad relationships, or you ignore your gut, and your gut tells you. But sometimes a lot of people go from the gut, and racism comes from the gut too, because it's just built in there. It's a pathology. And in this case, his heart space opens, and then he uses his brain to think, well, what's good for my kid? I know, I'll protect him by sending him to boarding school so he can't be harmed by these things, and it's going to be good for him. I love you, son. I'm thinking of you, and now I'm just going to leave you at this boarding school. And unfortunately, the whole cultural field is just, kids are going to go after him, so they end up abandoning him to the wolves in a way, which is very traumatizing. So that's where
it's really interesting to look at that kind of post-industrial or early just industrial era Britain with the traumas of the wars, and how it was pretty heartless and very just traumatic for, I mean, if you survived that era, you were traumatized, it seems.
Yeah, very repressive.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's like the Protestant, right? Which a lot of people here in the U.S., come from that Protestant. My parents came from that, and it's the spare the rod, spoil the child, and in a lot of the Latin cultures, and they're just, that's unthinkable, and I mean, we're still recovering from these wounds, all of us, multi-generational.
Yes.
And it's just where we are as a society and generationally, to think that now co-sleeping, sharing a bed with your infant is considered healthy bonding for a lot of the United States parenting experts. I mean, think about that as compared to where we were 100 years ago, right? I mean, that was for the poor people who didn't know any better, right? You should know better than to sleep with your child as an infant, Incredible the healing that still needs to take place.
Yeah, that's really good points.
And also,
Go
ahead.
I just wanted to throw in kind of a quick factoid about The Wind in the Willows. A.A. Milne actually adapted that story into a play called Toad of Toad Hall that I think Disney kind of took that as well, because there's Mr. Toad's Wild Ride Adventure at Disneyland, and I think at Disney World, not sure.
Oh, wow.
I actually love Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. At least I used to. It was one of my favorite rides at Disneyland. Like a cool, psychedelic wild ride.
Yeah, all the doors that would open up at the last minute, right?
The train coming at you, like, just really primitive effects, but great forced perspective that really puts you in it.
And is that where Frog and Toad came from? Because those were
Mr.
some
Toad.
wonderful books, Frog and Toad. I love those.
Yeah, I think those are from Mr. Toad and Frog in Wind in the Willows originally, but Disney bought the property and turned it into a Disney property. Interesting. I assume Milne did that play after Winnie the Pooh, I would assume.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so he was a serious playwright before that, But the other thing I was going to say, this film also does an amazing job of unpacking the caste system, the class system, and how it affects them, and how it harms everyone, actually. So there's that beautiful moment where Kelly MacDonald steps out of it and says, well, then I'll leave. And she says, you guys aren't doing right by the kid. She says, I bore him. It almost killed me. And says, with respect, Mom, a cow can have a baby. It's just, like just the idea of being spoken to by someone who's below you in status is just mind blowing.
And not to be able to really be with her mother as she passed, like this idea of what would we do without you? You can't go be with your dying mom. Like, no, we own you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And she asserts herself and goes, but Yeah,
it's
you sort of get that sense of healthy relationship she has with her husband versus.
right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But I think also, I mean, this film made me, it made me obviously very nostalgic, but also nostalgic for the films, you know, the dramas, you know, when they're done well, and you know, these beautiful dramas that you can watch as a family, right? They're so few and far between these days, and it's just I'm nostalgic for those films that are, like you said, they're layered. So whether you're 12 years old or 72 years old or 42, you know, it's you, there's something for everyone in watching the film. It's not just, you know, a teenage rom-com raunchy, you know, it's cross-generational. So beautiful.
Yeah, definitely.
Any thoughts, Mark, unless anyone else has more to say about Goodbye, Christopher Robin? Would love to get some ideas from people on, especially those the repeat attendees like Lynn. What should we be featuring coming up? Any thoughts, Mark? Have you given thought to Jonathan? Anyone ideas for what we should be talking about next month?
Well, I invite everyone to kind of, maybe we'll put up a poll or put up a list online and ask what films or what media have you watched recently that resonated with what we're going through for you? That would be a really interesting.
My husband and I watched Inherit the Wind the other night with Spencer Tracy from 1960, and talk about a cultural moment. You know, like, can we teach evolution, and are we, you know, the shock of the religious small town having the outer world brought in terms of science. It's pretty interesting. And the filmmaking, I thought about you, Mark, when you were talking about, you know, how filmmaking evolves, just what they showed and how they showed it. It's pretty primitive. A lot of, except for the people are up close and very real, but the townsfolk and how they represented the collective was almost laughable. It was like the birds, looking back at Hitchcock, the birds, they look so fake, you know, those birds now that were so petrifying. Just looking at the crowd, it's not a very realistic crowd at all, and what they do is pretty laughable.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, some of those old films, they're still great, but you can really kind of feel, well, once you start to study how cinematic consciousness has evolved, you could start seeing, you know, how that the language of the cinema has become more and more subtle and complex.
And as you said, viewers have also gotten more complex. And as you said,
there's a co-evolutionary relationship. I talk about this a lot, and that this is from my mentor, Bob Weiss. This is his teaching. Because he, you know, at the time when he was mentoring me, he had been in the industry for over 60 years, and he was in it from the silent era and from behind the scenes, you know. And so, you know, I mean, here's the guy who edited Citizen Kane and directed Sound of Music. So he had us, you know. So he said that in the beginning, you had to really be linear and simple and direct in communication. If you wanted to show somebody going from one house to someone else's houses, you have to show them leaving their own house, going out, going to the other house, going up to the, you know, you have to show the whole process, because you couldn't cut from a person in one place to a person in a totally different place.
People would be too confused, right?
But yeah, but over time, you notice that the audience and the cinematic language were co-evolving, becoming more complex, more non-linear connections, developing the language. So as the language developed, the audience was evolving and vice versa.
Mhm.
So once we know that, we could see, how, like, one of the points Lynn was bringing up is at a certain period, characters were more multidimensional, but the story around them that they were in, and the field and the relational fields and the social representations were very thin.
It was really
We
interesting.
hadn't gone
Yeah.
deep enough yet.
There was nobody of any kind of diversity in this town, which is, a small southern town. That there were people other than the white church people. Any crowd scene was just, there was no one out on the periphery that represented anything else. And I think about, say Spike Lee, how he always had so many characters in the background doing their thing, whatever it was. It's much more like a real scene where there's the complexity of the larger social setting.
Speaking of complexity, I started watching Sense8, the Wachowskis series, and I think I've only watched 2 episodes, but I'm at this point where it's like, okay, 8 stories, too many characters, too many stories. So I'm looking forward to continuing. I have like a 3-episode rule before. And of course, I'm a huge fan of the Wachowskis. So anyone else?
It's worth it.
It is worth it. Okay.
Yeah, at least 4. I think it takes 3 to 4 before you start to feel everything coming together into a flow. It's very.
If you keep watching it,
Mhm.
there's going to be a point where you start being able to hold all of it at the same time.
Beautiful. I love it. Jonathan, have you seen the OA?
I watched the first part of the OA, I think.
The first season?
Yeah, I don't think I got through the whole season because I loved the beginning of it, and then when it turned into this sort of kidnapping plot, then it got less interesting to me. I didn't.
It gets out of that. You gotta watch through that. It's worth getting through the whole thing to the end of the second season.
Really, I mean, I thought the first episode was amazing. I was like, wow, what a beautiful thing this did. And then suddenly it's this whole kind of hostage thing, and it wasn't convincing to me either. It just didn't.
Yeah, you have to get past that. And I'm a big fan of Britt Marling. Obviously, My Origin, I thought was phenomenal.
That's right. I think I saw that actually. Origin.
Yeah, Mark, I think I had that on your list, I Origin.
Have you seen The Sound of My Voice?
No.
That was not a short film, but a film that Britt Marling and the co-creator for OA made maybe back in 2011 or 2012. Really good movie.
The Sound of My Voice?
Sound of My Voice. It's about some investigative journalists trying to infiltrate a cult. And I'll just leave it at that because I'll let you explore it for yourself. But it really leaves an impression on you.
Rob, did you see the OA?
I haven't seen it yet, but I'm really looking forward to it because I'm a big Britt Marling fan too after seeing Sound of My Voice. So
2011.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, I was going to say with we have to wrap up probably soon, but with Inherit the Wind and things like that, one of the things that Mark and I always talk about is how Hollywood tends to be very liberal and very pluralistic, even back then, in the sense that they will try to kind of see all viewpoints, but they're not looking deeply. So in that one, they're much more sort of going to be sympathetic, obviously, with the lawyer who's arguing for teaching evolution. So they're going to tend to represent the people on the other side as primitive or yahoos, or whereas a more integral film is going to try to go into how the people who oppose it are thinking and find out what's their internal logic and kind of honor that they have a truth, even though there is a higher truth. Those people still have a truth, and it's important to unpack where that's coming from. That's how you help the people in that particular structure to evolve upwards as well. Say, oh yeah, we are kind of attached to an old way of thinking. And that's what these new filmmakers are doing in a really sophisticated way, I think.
Jonathan, anything else that you're watching?
I started watching Ramy, Ramy, which is a number of people have been fond of that. It's on Hulu. It's about a young Muslim kid in America who's trying to make his way between being very American and having this traditional Muslim family. So it's a pretty funny comedy. It seems like what we would call integrative, which means that it's sort of unpacking what it is to what he's going through. I don't know yet whether it's going to be integral, if it's going to actually have a higher truth, or if it's just more pluralistic, but it's quite funny. It reminds me of the show Atlanta, which is with Donald Glover, which is unpacking the Black experience in America.
Well, that sounds great. I want to say that I would love, as Conscious Good and supporting creators, we need more humor. We need more comedy. We need a lightness. Just as a society in general, to be able to, like a Groundhog Day, where yes, there's a truth and a realization, and it's so poignant, and yet we can laugh along the way. I think there's such power in the comedy genre that hasn't fully been explored to the extent that I think it can in terms of consciousness raising. So
yeah, I think that's important, especially right now, for us to understand that in times of great challenge, people tend to look for more uplifting experiences, because reality is so like not uplifting that they look for some kind of escape. But it's not really an escape. When you have high stress, the amount of stress that we have right now is unhealthy. So any kind of escape you can do in terms of from the oppressive panic and stress, any kind of escaping from the actual stress field is great. So if we could bring our audience out of that stress field for a moment, and one of the great fast ways to do it is with humor. It gets right, it can, if it hits, it pops you right out of your stress field, it's like, and relieves some of that stress too. It's like, so if we can do that with a underlying evolutionary shift or lesson, that's where the most power is. It's like, the old Hollywood studio executives, had the saying, if you want to send a message, wrap it in sugar. But there is a truth to that. It's like we tend to shut down when our perceptual field is challenged. So any kind of area, so it's like, if we're trying to reach people, like, wake people up to, if you're into climate change, or you're into the authoritarianism, or you're into all of these different fields going on, or so it's addressing them directly, or racism, white supremacy, all of these, by trying to talk to it directly, to try to write a book about how bad war is, our defenses instantly go up. People who are not open to that are instantly shut down automatically, because it's upfront. So if you're trying to reach people and change minds, you got to recognize that to reach them, you have to transcend that boundary. And so that's really kind of, and that boundary is, we keep coming back to this, but this new generation of African American filmmakers really is a great teaching tool here, because they are approaching white supremacy, or this concept of of it being of white supremacy or racism in the United States between the African American community and others. They are attempting to not approach it directly. They either are approaching it through humor or through showing the lived experience of the people inside the system and how everyone, in black, white, everybody is entrapped in a system that creates this field.
Maybe that's one of the films, Peele's, one of Jordan Peele's films. I know that might be a good idea, but I think it's a great idea to do a poll, Mark. That would be wonderful. We could do that on the Creators Network. And everyone is welcome to stay on and continue speaking and communicating, but we are past our 1 hour, and it's been a delight sharing this time and space with all of you. And thank you so much. And thank you, Mark. So